In this video, we are going to continue talking about price controls. Specifically, we're going to be talking about price ceilings and the effects of price ceilings. All right, so we've got 5 effects already written up here. We're going to go through these really quickly, just kind of a brief overview, and then we'll look at each one a little bit more closely. All right, so the first effect that we're going to have are shortages. Actually, I'm just going to read these and then we'll go through them. There's no point in me synopsizing them when we're about to go through them. All right, so the first effect are shortages. All right, then the second effect is a reduction in the quality of the product, right, that has the price ceiling on it. 3, high search/transaction costs for the product. 4, it creates what is known as a deadweight loss when we have a price ceiling. And 5, we have a misallocation of resources. All right, so those are the 5 effects of a price ceiling. So let's go ahead and start looking at shortages. All right, so shortages occur when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. Right? So we have more people that want the good at a given price than we have supplying the good at that price. Right? And that's what's going to happen when we have a binding price ceiling. Yeah, no, that's fine. No, let's give ourselves a little bit more room. All right. But this is the case. This is when we're going to have shortages. I'm going to go ahead and erase that. All right, and then just draw out a very large graph. All right, so here we've got our price quantity axes. We're going to grab our demand curve and our supply curve. And we'll go ahead and mark our equilibrium. All right, so when we've got this, right, this is just our standard supply and demand graph, right? If we were to have a shock of any kind in this system, right, whether, demand increases or decreases, supply changes somehow, whatever it is, right, then we would see, or we would expect to see, a change in the equilibrium, right, as the market tries to adjust to this new shock. Right, if there's higher demand, we need to increase the price so that it gets used for the high value purposes kind of first, and then as we go, kind of the less valuable until we run out. Right, but we don't have that when we have a price ceiling. Right, so if we have a price ceiling, and we know that a binding price ceiling has to be below the equilibrium price, right? So I'll go ahead and draw in our price ceiling here with this purple marker. And so we can see kind of it's a ceiling because the market would like to push up to equilibrium, but we can't go past that price control, that price ceiling. All right, so that's why it is a ceiling. All right, and again, this illustrates why a binding price ceiling must be below the equilibrium price, because if the price ceiling was up here, right, then we would just meet here at the equilibrium and we wouldn't go anywhere near that price ceiling, so it would essentially not have any effect. All right, but we can see, all right, here at our price ceiling, all right, our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied no longer are equal, right? In equilibrium, they are equal. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, right? The market, it's sometimes known as the equilibrium price is the market clearing price, where everyone that wants the good gets it and everyone that wants to sell the good is able to, right? Or that is willing and able on both sides, right? So those are equal, but that's not the case when we have a price ceiling, Right here, we see the price ceiling hits our supply curve. That's our quantity supplied right there. Then we follow it until it hits the demand curve. Right, and we see that our quantity demanded is quite a bit larger than our quantity supplied, right? Or at least the way I drew it, right? And so the result of this, of course, if there are more people wanting the good than the amount of the good available, is that we have a shortage, right? We don't, and the reason for this is because a price ceiling artificially lowers the price of a good, right? And as we know, prices act as signals, right? So if you artificially lower the price of a good, then you are in effect telling people this good doesn't have many valuable purposes, right? And it's perfectly suitable for whatever you're wanting to do with it if you're thinking about buying it, right? Even if the fact is that it's not really suitable for what you want to do, right? You know, this is a dumb example, but let's say that we were talking about water, right? Either bottled water or the jugs of distilled water, right? If, well, actually, let's specifically talk about distilled water, right? I believe that's what you need for babies. I think that might be true. I'm not sure. I don't know that much about babies. But, all right, if, you know, you've got a price control, right, and you've got a price control on that distilled water, then, you know, somebody might be like, well, I would love to take a bath in distilled water and go buy all the distilled water just to bathe in if the price is extremely low, right? Whereas somebody that needs it for something more important, like mixing with formula to feed their children, right? They might be willing to pay a higher price just to ensure that they actually get this product that they need, right? With a price ceiling, they can't do that, right? They are not allowed to kind of outbid somebody that's going to use it for something a little bit more frivolous, right? Again, that's kind of a silly example, but that is what we're seeing with a price ceiling. And actually, that's something we're going to talk about once again, although we might not talk about it as long because we just talked about it a little bit. So the next of our effects is a reduction in quality. Actually, you know, I'm not even gonna write anything down for this one. So this one, you guys probably just want to write down what I say and not what I write down, because I might not write anything down. But when we're talking about these reductions in quality, what's happening is that producers can't, there's no incentive for a producer of a good that has a price ceiling to maintain their product, all right? Especially if we kind of go with our example of rent control, right? If you own an apartment that's rent controlled and you're renting it out, you have very little incentive to fix anything because the price is probably so far below market value that you're already kind of losing money, and if you do anything, then you're going to even lose more money, right? And so in a rent controlled apartment, you might see just the bare minimum of maintenance done to it, right? Just enough so that they don't get sued, I suppose, right? Other things, if you can't increase the price, then you might try to find other ways of increasing your kind of profit margins. One of those would be to cut costs, right? So maybe you don't use, maybe you're making some kind of dongle out of steel, right? Maybe you don't use as much steel. Maybe you don't make the steel as thick, right? Maybe you switch from steel to aluminum. Maybe you just use a lower grade of steel, right? In any of those would be kind of examples of a reduction in quality, right? I can't actually maximize profit on the base of price, so how else am I going to do it? Well, cut my costs, right? If I can decrease my costs so that my costs are below that price ceiling, right, I can still make a profit, right? If not, it's not really going to be worth it to me to make this product any better, right? Another way to think of it is if, the price, there's a price ceiling for a type of good, there's no reason for anyone to innovate and try to make their product better to attract more people to it, because it's probably, they're not going to be able to increase the price as well to make up for those innovations, right? And to get their money back. All right, so we're going to usually see a reduction in quality we often see a reduction in quality when we have price ceilings. All right, next we have high search and transaction costs. All right, so this is another one that I'm probably not going to write much down for, if anything at all. But when you take away the option of consumers to compete on a price basis, right? So consumers, when we have this price ceiling, consumers can't compete with each other on price, right? They can't try to outbid each other for a good that they want or need and that they value very highly, right? And so if you don't have a way for them to do that, then that doesn't mean that competition is gone, right? If you remove price competition, there is still competition, right? And it takes the form of these high search and transaction costs, right? That's one of the ways it's going to take shape, right? And so what we mean by these high search and transaction costs is, one, if we just think on kind of the basis of if there's a shortage, right, it's going to be hard to find whatever good you're looking for, right? And so the way you might compete is you just search for this good, right? You look around for it, you spend a lot of time just trying to find it, right? And that's costly, right? If you have to take time out of your day, take off work to go visit 3 different shops to try to find some good you're looking for because there's a shortage of it, right? That's a cost that might have been less, or there's probably more than just the extra money you would have paid for it if there was no price ceiling, right? And it was plentiful, so you didn't have to go searching for it. You could just go to a store and find it instead of trying to look all the way, all over the place. Right. For rent control, there's kind of an anecdotal story about New Yorkers going through obituaries to see who's died that had a rent control department, right? So spending time doing things like that to find one of these goods that are very valuable but are priced as if they're not, all right? And so people are going to really compete to get the few that are there, right? Additionally, high transaction costs are also going to be in place, right? So whether that's you have to sit in line and wait for the good, right? Like we saw in kind of the USSR, right? Because in a communist state, everything has a price control on it. There's a price control on everything, right? And so we can see a lot of examples, especially of the price ceiling and the effects of a price ceiling in the USSR, right? People would wait in line for hours and hours for, a couple of cabbages, right? Or a pound of butter. Maybe not a pound. No, that's a normal amount, I think. Yeah, a pound of butter. That's not even that much, right? And sometimes you'd wait, for a couple hours in a line just for, the last pair of shoes to get taken right before you got there, right? And so you waited all that time that you could have spent doing something productive, right? Trying to get this good or goods, right? That can also breed kind of corruption, right? In the form of, hey, I've got this good, you're gonna have to give me money to be able to get access to it, so on and so forth, all right? And so when we have these price ceilings, I don't know, I pointed at the empty whiteboard, but when we have these price ceilings, right, we're gonna experience kind of high search and transaction costs for the goods that we're looking for. Another example, this one's actually from your book. A lot of their stuff focuses on the oil crisis during the 70s. And they mention how people would be forced to kind of pull up to gas stations really early in the morning, kind of wait for hours just to try to get some gas. And again, just like with the other example, you weren't even guaranteed that you were going to get any. All right. I keep acting like I'm going to move on from this, but I'm not. Just to kind of have the counterweight to this, right? So the other side of it is that if we didn't have those price controls, right? If we didn't have a price ceiling, then the market is going to kind of allocate those resources as efficiently as possible, right? So if we're talking about something like gas, right? Well, if the price of gas was allowed to rise, one, that would encourage some producers to get into the game, right? If the price rises above their production cost, they now have an incentive to enter the market, right? So that would increase the supply, right? Or at least the quantity. That would increase the quantity supplied, right? You would also probably see more people just not driving as much, right? So if you're not, if you're ever going to pay, you guys probably remember this back. Was it around when was it? Anyways, somewhat recently, probably like a decade ago. It's recently, but gas was like getting close to like $4 a gallon here, which is insane, right? If they had capped the price at $2, right, we probably would have seen another oil or a gas crisis, right? But since the price was allowed to go up to $4, well, what happened, right? People didn't just go driving around town all the time, right? You didn't take as many joyrides. Maybe you waited to go into, I'm saying go into town. I lived outside of a city, so we were going into town when we went to any stores, right? But maybe if you did live outside of town, you just waited to go into town when you're going to go to a bunch of different stores, right? You're not going to just run to Walmart and run home because it's kind of a waste of gas, right? You're going to use that gas more sparingly. You're going to go, go to work, go to school, maybe start carpooling, right? But people are going to adjust to that higher price, right? And the people that have to consume a large amount of gas, either for their job or for whatever other reason, they're still going to have access to it, right? They're going to have to pay more, but at the same time, right, the implication is that what they're using it for is a high value use, or they would cut back, right? All right, so we are actually done with that one. Now, let's talk about this deadweight loss. So the concept of deadweight loss is tied with the idea of surplus, right? Kind of like our consumer and producer surplus. And it is the reduction in total surplus caused by market distortions and inefficiencies. All right, in this case, the market distortion is the price ceiling. All right, so here in just a second, I'm going to let you guys look at that for a second. I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we will throw up another model. All right, so once again, we're going to start with just a standard supply and demand graph. All right, actually, I'm going to fill in a couple of other things, although they won't really be pertinent for a while. All right, so at equilibrium, all right, we know that the consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price. All right, so this triangle, I'm trying not to go too far to the sides because I need to erase this later. All right, and the producer surplus is the area below price and above supply. All right, so we've got our consumer and our producer surplus here at equilibrium. Now, when we include a price ceiling, right, so let's say that we do a price ceiling of 15. All right, so we're going to say we've got this price ceiling of 15. We can go ahead and run this over. And we're going to run this up. All right, so when we have a price, I probably should have erased this stuff first. That's okay. All right, so when we have a price ceiling, all right, in this case, a price ceiling of 15, all right, this changes our producer and consumer surplus. All right, because again, we know that producer surplus, or actually let's start with consumer, that's what I did last time. All right, so consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. All right, well now the price is 15. All right, if we have a price ceiling of 15, that is the price. All right, and so we're going to say this area, all right, above the price and below the demand curve is our consumer surplus. All right, so this weird, is that a trapezoid? I'm not sure. All right, and our producer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply curve. All right, and so this is what our producer and consumer surplus look like now. And we see that we've got an area of this graph that used to be part producer surplus and part consumer surplus, right, but now is nothing. Right, and this is that deadweight loss. All right, this triangle in the green, that is our deadweight loss. All right, it's the loss in the gains of trade from this kind of inefficiency, right, this price ceiling. Right, because at the equilibrium price of 25, right, there were 100 units being sold. Right, when we changed the price, right, with our price ceiling to 15, right, now the quantity supplied is 50, the quantity demanded is 125. All right, so one, there's a shortage of 75 units, right? So that a shortage, the size of the shortage would be the difference between quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. But also, as far as gains from trade, right, how many units of this good are being traded, right? The answer is 50, right? If producers only have 50 units of the good, it doesn't matter how many people want it. Right, only 50 of them are going to buy it, right, or going to be able to buy it, right, and so that's why we cut this consumer supply or consumer surplus off right here, right, and it doesn't fall into the rest of that, right. These are, you know, these 50 units of the good that could have been sold, right, at the equilibrium price, and would have split producer and consumer surplus between them, right, or would have, you know, that amount would have been split in some way between the consumer and producer surplus. Now it's just gone. All right, it's lost, and it's just a dead weight loss. All right, so we can take this since, like in previous chapters, when we were looking at our consumer surplus. I guess that was the last chapter, right? Our deadweight loss is a triangle, right? And so we can find the area of that triangle using, or finding our kind of a number for the deadweight loss using the formula for the area of a triangle, right? So 1/2 base times height. I'm going to erase this here in a second and we'll write that up, but 1/2 base, the base runs from 50 to 100, so it's going to be a base of 50, and then the height runs from 15 to 35, so that's going to be a height of 20. Right, and so we can just do that calculation. So 1/2 times 100 minus 50 times 35 minus 15, and our deadweight loss equals 500. All right, so that is the loss of total surplus, right? That comes from this this price ceiling. All right, and we could compare that if we wanted to calculate, if we had calculated the total surplus ahead of time, or calculated our producer and consumer surplus, right? We would kind of be able to compare those together, right? Compare those with each other would probably be the more proper way of saying that. All right, but that is our deadweight loss. All right, the last thing that we're going to talk about, the last effect of a price ceiling, is the misallocation of resources. And again, this is one that I'm not necessarily going to write anything for. So we've already talked a little bit about this idea of misallocation of resources, actually. So we know that goods have different uses, right? And some uses are more valuable than others, right? So I'm talking about if you're making pencils, you're not going to use mahogany, you're going to use something like pine, right? If you are, if you need distilled water, then you're probably, if you need it for your children, right, versus you just want to take a bath in it for some reason, then you're probably going to be willing to pay more for it than the person that just wants to take a bath in distilled water for some reason, right? And that's kind of the point of prices, right? If there's a really valuable use for a good, right, that price needs to be higher so that people don't just waste that good for whatever, right? When we have a price ceiling, that signal is distorted / gone, right? There's price is no longer saying, hey, I'm really expensive. If you buy me, you better, have a good reason to do so, right? You better know that what you're going to use me for is worth what I cost, right? That's essentially what high prices are telling us. Lower prices are telling us, hey man, like, there's either I'm really common and super available, so you can use me for whatever, it doesn't really matter, or I'm kind of a low value thing, low quality thing that is suitable for a low value activity or process or whatever, right? If you get rid of that price signal, right, with a price ceiling, you're artificially telling people that this good is not as valuable and it doesn't have other more valuable uses, right? And so people aren't going to have the incentive to refrain from using a valuable resource if it has a price control, right? They're going to say, well, it's cheap. I'm willing to buy this at this price, and so they will if they can find it. And those resources don't necessarily get to the people that would use them for the highest value purposes, right? We're going to talk more about that when we talk about the effects of price floors, because misallocation of resources is also an effect of having a price floor. But we will talk more about that later. Again, just with the misallocation of resources, when you don't let prices act as a signal, you don't let prices act as an incentive, right? You're going to get you're going to get inefficiency, right? Resources that kind of have more valuable uses are going to be used for things that they arguably shouldn't be used for. But at the very least, it's just not as efficient as it could be. All right, but those are the effects of a price ceiling. Again, in the next video, we will be looking at the effects of a price floor. All right, but I will see you in that video.